I am about to review every single episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. This video is the first part of a series I'm making for this brand new channel. I will be reviewing each episode of The Clone Wars chronologically, with every season being separated into its own video. I first watched The Clone Wars in the spring of 2020, as the final season was coming out. Knowing that I loved the Star Wars movies and The Mandalorian, a couple of my friends finally convinced me to try this show. After pushing through the first season, I quickly started to fall in love. The main characters were endearing, and so many of the story arcs remarkably well written. But it was mostly because the show opened up the world of Star Wars to me. The lore, if you will. More than just turning me into a Star Wars nerd, however, this show was something joyful and meaningful that kept me going through that pretty rough time in my life. To this day, The Clone Wars is still one of my favorite, most rewatched shows ever. Fair warning, I will be pretty detailed, talk about reveals and plot points, and occasionally refer to future episodes as I go. And yes, I was a film student who took a film criticism class in college, so I am trying to be honestly critical and approach this show from the perspective of an adult. But as I said, I still love The Clone Wars so much, and even some of the dumber stuff makes me laugh, so I'm gonna have fun here as well. One final caveat. Obi-Wan Kenobi is my favorite character of all time, mostly because of this show, so I will be biased towards episodes around him. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start off with the movie, because it's basically the pilot of the show. In the first scene, we are immediately given a goal, saving Jabba the Hutt's son, and we are told why the Republic's relationship with Jabba is important. The movie effectively sets up the brotherly, bantering dynamic between Anakin and Obi-Wan, whether you're familiar with the prequels or not. It also introduces the new character of Ahsoka, and establishes her relationships with Anakin, Obi-Wan, Rex, and the other clones. I can see why, when Ahsoka was first introduced, the audience saw her as just an annoying kid. But honestly, Anakin is just as annoying or argumentative here, and I don't think there's anything egregious about Ahsoka in this movie. It's a solid introduction to who she is, a sweet, enthusiastic, confident young Padawan who is excited to learn from a great Jedi like Anakin Skywalker. She listens to her superiors, but she's also not afraid to speak her mind or jump in on the dangerous action. The other important introduction here is Dooku's Sith-trained assassin, Asajj Ventress. She's desperate to gain her master's approval, but she often risks failure by being cocky, easily irritated, and always itching for a good fight. Ventress starts off just as a good villain for a while, but later in the show, she eventually becomes a much more complex character that I find pretty compelling. The Clone Wars movie is pretty kiddie, but some of the episodes in the show are worse in that respect. There's still some entertaining banter and fun action throughout. However, the first third of this 1 hour, 40-minute movie definitely contains all the best parts, and would make a solid 30-minute pilot episode for the show without the whole Jabba's son plot. The scene between Obi-Wan and the Separatist general is iconic, and then after that, the movie is pretty forgettable and feels very dragged out by the end. Zero the Hutt is one of the worst, most annoying characters in the show. And I'm sorry, but I don't really care about Padme that much either. That whole Coruscant section is just an excuse to introduce her character, and honestly, I got bored. When it comes to the animation, I think they started off with a good foundation here. It's a clean and charming style, but if you compare this movie to later seasons of the show, there's obviously room for vast improvement and advances in the technology. The characters' mouths don't quite form the dialogue perfectly, and the character model movements are pretty jerky. It was definitely a little off-putting to go from this back to this. Season 1, Episode 1, Ambush. The first time I tried watching The Clone Wars, I'll admit, I gave up after this first episode. I thought that if the whole show was like this, I wasn't gonna make it. I didn't know what to expect and quickly got bored. I also didn't know about the movie, which introduces the show much better. The Clone Wars show is really about Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, none of whom are present here. On this rewatch, episode 1 is a bit better than I remembered. It's a simple, decently funny episode, but it is skippable. It really doesn't make sense that Ventress and Dooku would underestimate Yoda this much, I like Yoda as a character, and he has some good moments here, but I quickly forgot what was even going on and why. The one important thing this episode does is introduce the theme of the clones, the other main characters in the show, having individual personalities, which is admittedly very important, so I will give it that. Season 1, Episode 2, Rising Malevolence. For being so early in the show, this is a good episode. The dialogue isn't brilliant or anything, but it shows us the unequal relationship between Dooku and Grievous, as well as the tension between Anakin, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and the Jedi Council, which remains one of the central stories for the whole show. The episode does this by introducing a recurring pattern in the first couple seasons of Clone Wars. Anakin teaches Ahsoka how to strategically disobey orders, and Obi-Wan reluctantly allows it to happen while checking in on them. I really like the character of Plo Koon, especially his determined kindness and value of the clones, and the sweet connection between him and Ahsoka, as Master Plo was the one to find and bring her to the Jedi. Overall, a solid start to our first fun multi-episode arc. Season 1, Episode 3, Shadow of Malevolence. I don't have a lot to say about this one. There's more ship flying action than anything else, and the action is fine. The dialogue is slightly worse than the previous episode, and there's a pretty long lead up to the actual goal of the Republic medical base. However, this is the first time in Star Wars we're introduced to large space-dwelling creatures like the Rays and the Purrgil. George Lucas even brings to life the emptiness of space. And isn't this a beautiful shot? We see that Anakin feels the weight of his mistakes as his reckless plan gets several clones killed. But this episode is mostly just a bridge to the next one. You'd think that the Separatists would be able to easily win by making more overpowered tech like this, but whatever. Season 1, Episode 4, Destroy Malevolence. This is the most frequently memed episode from the first season, and it really is hilarious. There's great banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and a classic fight scene between Obi-Wan and Grievous. The ship's interior makes for some fun action here. While they are sometimes annoying and pointless, I don't mind 3PO and R2 in this one. They're kind of funny. Padme is at her best, in my opinion, when we see her relationship with Anakin, when we learn more about him through her. And that is mostly what happens in this episode. General Grievous is an appropriately intimidating villain. We see more of the tense dynamic between him and Count Dooku in this episode, but Grievous is usually pretty one-dimensional. I do wish Dooku at least had a little more interesting nuance. However, I know it's hard to develop any real suspense around these villains because we already know they both have to survive uncaptured until Revenge of the Sith. Season 1, Episode 5, Rookies. I like this one. It's a decently fun episode that wouldn't matter on its own, except that it introduces the unique personalities of Fives and Echo, two important characters we will follow in the future. We are introduced to not only the dynamics between different clones, whether of equal rank or different, but also the bravery and determination common to all of them. Just minutes after meeting the character, you already feel Heavy's death, even without the information we'll learn in a later episode. These commando droids are successfully cooler and more intimidating than the basic B1 droids. My one critique is the repeated cutting back to Grievous saying basically the same thing over and over, and Anakin and Obi-Wan only provide basic exposition. But I love the camaraderie between Rex and Cody here, and I wish we got more of it in the show. Season 1, Episode 6, Downfall of a Droid. This is probably the most kiddie arc in the whole show. The Trandoshan scavenger is weird and gross and not entertaining to me at this point in my life. The assassin droids are a super cool idea, but it's not fun to watch Anakin be annoyed and annoying the whole episode. This arc also depends a lot on your attachment to R2-D2, and there isn't a lot there for me personally. Also, what happened to the announcer for this episode?
After suffering a series of disastrous defeats at the hands of General Grievous.
And why does the animation and lighting look weirdly off? It's not just me, right? Season 1, Episode 7, Duel of the Droids. Just a continuation of the last episode, but a little better. There's good action, and Anakin's feelings are finally justified. I don't love that Obi-Wan is just the bossy voice of reason, but I know they were still figuring out what to do with this character at this point, and that's all they really had to work with from Attack of the Clones, to be fair. We see that Ahsoka can hold her own against droids, but not long against Grievous. It would have been easy to downplay him being a legitimately threatening villain to a Padawan, but I appreciate that they didn't. Ahsoka has to be clever to get away from Grievous. She's not overpowered, she's still young and inexperienced. However, I do love her diving headfirst off the ship before all the boys without hesitation. The R3 twist is very predictable. At least the Trandoshan's death was funny.
There's your bonus!
And Grievous gets away again, with I think the exact same animation as in the Malevolence finale. Unfortunately, I do think there's too much Grievous in this first season. This is only 7 episodes in, and I am already starting to get bored of him. Season 1, Episode 8, Bombad Jedi. This is it, y'all. This is the worst episode of Clone Wars, featuring the terrible trio of Jar Jar, Padme, and C-3PO. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. If you haven't, don't bother, unless you want to be able to say you have seen it. But the next episode's intro sums it all up for you. Season 1, Episode 9, Cloak of Darkness. I don't know why Ahsoka is with another master that isn't hers, but whatever. I always like seeing the main characters interact with the personalities of other Jedi, and Master Luminara Unduli provides a very interesting contrast. Ahsoka can be impatient and intense, but Luminara is a calmly confident and methodical Jedi, a good balance to Anakin. She is all in on the Jedi principle of detachment, and she'll be an important side character going forward. Ventress gets to show off her assassin and acrobat skills in this episode, and is pretty intimidating. I liked watching the lightsaber fights. They show us how Ventress can be reckless and sloppy, but fights dirty, meaning she should not be underestimated. I actually didn't remember if the Senate Guard captain betrayed them or not, so a pretty good reveal. I liked the idea of making him a foil to the clone captain. This episode is a learning experience for both Luminara and Ahsoka, but if I'm getting nitpicky, I think it's a bit confusing on which message we should take. Is it Ahsoka who needs to learn from Luminara, or is it the other way around? Or is it both? Luminara learns to take Ahsoka seriously, but she also keeps Ahsoka from making mistakes, but Ahsoka is also rewarded for disobeying her. I guess it seems like the opening word of wisdom is trying to argue that Ahsoka's instincts are right, but she took that advice from the captain who betrayed them. I'm only being a bit more critical here because this is a pretty good, thought-provoking episode. Anyway, can we all agree Newt Gunray is the worst? Season 1, Episode 10, Lair of Grievous. This episode introduces Jedi Master Kit Fisto, who seems cool but really doesn't have a specific personality. It's totally okay to pull in these Jedi we recognize from the movies and keep using them as side characters, but it does make episodes focused on them a little less interesting. Thankfully, episodes like this are a pretty rare occurrence. Kit's old Padawan, Nadar, has a pretty predictable, young guy makes a rash, immature mistake that gets him killed arc, but that's fine too. The dialogue is more kiddie, but Grievous is pretty intimidating here, crawling and swinging around during that fight in the dark hallway. The best part of this episode, however, is the insight we get into General Grievous's history, which does so much for his character for me, considering I've been on the brink of being annoyed by him up to this point. The episode also builds on the complicated relationships among the Separatist ranks, and the untrustworthiness of Count Dooku. Grievous does have a point about it being ridiculous that he's expected to kill Jedi with those stupid battle droids. Yoda also has a pretty good quote at the end that sums a lot of the Clone Wars up.
In this war, a danger there is of losing who we are.
You'd think he'd have noticed that, huh? Season 1, Episode 11, Dooku Captured. This episode is by far my favorite of Season 1. It's packed full of hilarious dialogue and peak banter between Obi-Wan and Anakin, later between them and Count Dooku as well. It also makes Ahsoka, Anakin, and Obi-Wan feel more like a trio, with a fun, comfortable teasing dynamic. The whole intro sequence and Gundark scene are both very entertaining. And here we finally meet the pirate captain Hondo Onaka. I actually love Hondo so much. He's charming and funny, while also being so predictably self-centered, always just in it for the money. But the main reason he's so hilarious is that, unlike his goons, Hondo is actually very smart. No one ever gets away with tricking him, which makes for some really fun interactions with people on both sides of the war. And I love that specifically Hondo and Obi-Wan have repeated interactions throughout the show. The characters of the pirates in general are an important addition to Star Wars, specifically the crime underworld. So far, just in Season 1, we've learned something else new and cool about this galaxy, at least every couple episodes. I think it's really creative and engaging, and it's one of the main reasons I enjoy this show so much. Season 1, Episode 12, The Gungan General. We get continued good banter and Hondo content from the last episode into this one. I don't love that Jar Jar's here, but this episode is actually the best one featuring him. The story and humor don't depend on his clumsiness, and he has some ideas that aren't bad. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Dooku being trapped together is a great scenario that makes for some very funny moments. I don't have a lot else to say about this one except, like the previous episode, I just really enjoy it. Hondo's just a guy who wants to make some money and wishes everyone would be honorable about it. Come on, you can't help but love him. Season 1, Episode 13, Jedi Crash. I felt the suspense in this episode. It's interesting to see everything go wrong for the Jedi for once, and I think it's important to see that Anakin's reckless heroism has negative consequences sometimes. We also see Ahsoka wrestling with the same issues as Anakin, with her strong emotions and attachment to her master, and how that conflicts with the Jedi Code. We meet Jedi Master Aayla Secura, who has more personality than Kit Fisto, but she's not as important as Luminara. Master Secura admires Anakin's bravery, but also focuses on making logical decisions for the greater good. Her honesty and empathy toward Ahsoka make her a good mentor in this episode. The Lurman pacifists are the first of many characters or groups in this show who will challenge the Jedi's position in the war. There's nothing outstanding about this episode, but nothing much to complain about either. It's partially just setting up the next one. Season 1, Episode 14, Defenders of Peace. The contrast of ideologies and discussion of generational tradition does get surprisingly deep in this episode, and I think it's done pretty well. You can see the truth on both sides. The son of the Lurman leader is a good character who wants to listen to his father for as long as he possibly can, until he can't stand by and watch his people die anymore. It's a solid arc. Even though we do get some new scary separatist tech, the action isn't that exciting. The pacing is kinda slow, and for that reason, I don't have much else to say. This random separatist guy is really funny though, I don't know why, but he just got me. Season 1, Episode 15, Trespass. The interplanetary politics of the prequel era are genuinely interesting to me, and they make up a significant part of Star Wars lore at this point in time. In the Clone Wars show, the politics are usually done well, complex enough to put the characters in difficult situations, but simple enough that motivations and plot lines are still easy to follow. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of politics in this episode, and it's contained to this one system where they haven't given me enough to make me care. The chairman of Pantora is really stubborn and annoying. At least he gets what's coming to him, I guess. I do like Senator Chuchi, and I'm glad she comes back later. We don't get anything particularly interesting from Obi-Wan and Anakin, though, so this episode is pretty skippable. Season 1, Episode 16, The Hidden Enemy. The character of Slick represents the belief that the clones are more like slaves than soldiers, an important theme that will come back in the future. I like watching the clone dynamics here, especially between Rex and Cody. The episode opens with decent action, and the traitor investigation, reveal, and chase is all pretty engaging. My one gripe is that Ventress is unnecessarily weird in this one. There's a few moments in earlier Clone Wars seasons where she's written in bad taste, I think, especially for a kids' show. The lightsaber fight here is pretty good, though. Season 1, Episode 17, Blue Shadow Virus. We've got another unfortunate Padme and Jar Jar combo in this episode. Dr. Vindy is also a very over-the-top stereotype, which could have been done a little better. The action here is fine, but I was getting bored before the actual break into the facility part. However, there are some good Anakin character moments where we clearly see that he will save the people he cares about before doing anything else every time. And there were a couple Obi-Wan lines that made me laugh. The phrase,
"I'm better at hiding it,"
ironically sums up a fundamentally important difference between Obi-Wan and Anakin, as well as revealing a similarity. Obi-Wan actually does relate to Anakin's feelings more than he visibly lets on to anyone. Season 1, Episode 18, Mystery of the Thousand Moons. We really didn't need a second episode to this arc. The plot felt very roundabout, and it was not at all explained how they got everyone out of the lab. The kid was kinda annoying, and the obstacles they faced on Iego were weird and random. We got a few more good Anakin character moments, though. He does almost lose his wife, his Padawan, and his captain in one fell swoop. Speaking of which, Anakin did not voice any concern about Rex. But you already know none of these characters can die, so the suspense the episode needs is unfortunately missing. Season 1, Episode 19, Storm over Ryloth. This episode gives us some good character dynamics to think about. Ahsoka is growing up and has to reckon with the challenges of war the hard way. She learns what it feels like to lose your men and experiences the consequences of disobeying direct orders. There's clear tension between her and Anakin, who is often disobeying orders and isn't a consistent role model for her. While he does have the experience to back his decisions up, he still wants Ahsoka to listen to him. They both know she hasn't earned the right to act on her own yet, but Ahsoka and Anakin also haven't been a team long enough to have all the kinks in their relationship worked out. They have to argue it out here in order to get to a healthier, more trusting place in the future. I thought Ahsoka's reactions were generally realistic and relatable for a teenager. This is another example where the Jedi take a loss, and I like that there's real battle strategy discussion. The episode is a solid arc in itself that also gets Obi-Wan and Mace Windu set up for the next two. The action is alright, I was entertained, and I enjoy a good, goofy-looking Separatist general. Season 1, Episode 20, Innocence of Ryloth. I like this episode. Numa is cute, and I enjoy her sweet interactions with the clones. I do wish the Twi'leks were a little better animated. The children in particular are kinda weird looking. We might not get much Obi-Wan character, but he does get some epic Jedi moments, such as using the Force on those creatures, which was sick, so I'm not complaining. Not much else to say. The episode is just one long attack plan/battle, but I was entertained the whole time. The arrogance of the tactical droid was also funny.
I am a droid. I am always right.
Season 1, Episode 21, Liberty on Ryloth. I don't really like Mace Windu, but at least he's not much of a jerk in this episode. Even though it's the conclusion of a 3-part arc, however, I wasn't super invested. The rebel leader Cham Syndulla is a cool and important character, with understandable motivations and a more complicated view on the Republic. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of character to this episode. Besides some decent action, battle strategy, and Mace Windu's epic moment, where, by the way, I can't tell if they left out the sound effects on purpose or not, I got a little bored. We do get one of the best battle droid lines here, though.
Not us. We're independent thinkers. Roger, 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 roger.
Season 1, Episode 22, Hostage Crisis. Can we all agree that Cad Bane is freaking awesome? He and his group of bounty hunters look sick and feel like real threats and heartless killers. This makes for some darker moments and themes in this hostage episode than we've seen before in the show. I also like that Anakin gets put in a tricky situation and has to be creative without his lightsaber. The first scene in this episode between Anakin and Padme has some pretty corny Attack of the Clones style dialogue, but hey, that's Star Wars for you. And we do need to occasionally see endearing scenes like that to believe in their relationship. It is interesting to think about how they kept that secret for so long, how they kept up a close relationship with how often they were separated, and how many times they might have almost been caught. And Zero the Hutt is back. Great. But other than that, a solid finale for Season 1. Thank you so much for watching my first video. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing to follow the rest of the series. I'm super excited about all the videos I've planned for this channel. Until the next one, may the Force be with you.